Conversations with Life. This is Cedar, Steve Cedar, and Xochitl, Soji, that's what it is, and Keith. And we're excited to be back here doing another season and keep the conversation rolling. So during the season, we're going to do a thing where we treat ourselves as sort of guests, and we'll have some other guests, but we're going to look into the story, look into the journey. Each of us has a path, and by doing this, we hope to kind of put some context to everything we've talked about. I think when you really look at somebody's path and what they've done and how they have created meaning for themselves and the sacrifices they've made, the mistakes they've made, in this case, a lot of mistakes. Kidding. No, just kidding. I think it's a good context to look at this. I mean, we like to talk about ourselves, of course. It's all fun and good, but I really hope in this conversation that we'll find some nooks and crannies, some ideas, some thought-provoking process, etc. Every time I get to sit down with somebody and be like, okay, what's your story? It's always just so interesting. There's always so much in a human life. So Xoch.
Yeah.
Tell us your story.
Ask me a question.
I feel like we've gotten to see into like each of our stories a little bit throughout. Like I've talked about my weight loss journey and my divorce and that kind of stuff. And I know, Xoch, you've talked about your upbringing and your family and your, what do they call it? Deconstruction. Yeah. Right. And Steve, we've heard so much as well about your backstory in your life. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think, you know, it's kind of funny, but I want to mirror the classical thing that everyone does in the LDS church. And it's like, tell me your conversion story. It's like, tell me your deconversion story.
Well, and part of why I felt this idea come forward was because we had such a great time with our guest last month. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking about, like, I want to hear Keith's story like that, you know, like where it's a little bit more of a linear thing and like kind of get a sense of the journey. So I was born Sarah Catherine Porter actually is my.
We're going back. We're going
my
all the
legal
way.
name, yeah, and raised in a really, really lovely, loving family. We had 7 kids. Wow. We lived on a little bit of acreage. So I grew up with literally birds and bees is what my dad raised.
Okay.
But never really had the talk about the birds and the bees.
No. And then ended up as a sex therapist. I'm sensing a theme.
It was just
the birds and the bees.
That was like how they avoided having to talk about it.
Go look outside.
Just spend time with the birds and bees. Figure it out.
Yeah. And and that my path was chosen for me from the time I was little. And really, even as a very young child, felt like I just wanted to be a mom. Yeah. And so did that and raised, my 8 kids in the Mormon church and took it quite seriously. And in that context, did a lot to develop myself spiritually. And I feel like I can really honestly say that my relationship with Christ and reading the Book of Mormon multiple times over the last couple of years I was in the church is what led me out. And I felt like the things that I was experiencing in the church as an institution, as a business, were very similar to the things that Jesus had problems with in the Jewish church. And it just came to a head with some things that were happening with my kids in the church and the really unethical and dangerous practices around bishops' interviews with particularly my oldest 2 sons talking about sexuality in a really unsafe way. And then my launch into midwifery in 2017, I felt such a strong call to midwifery that I almost couldn't deny it. Like it was, there was nothing about it that made sense for me to, as a homeschooling mom of 8 kids with a nursing toddler, to try to start a career. And yet I had to answer that. And as I did that, it was one of those periods of time where I felt like the Red Sea just opened, like opportunity after opportunity for it to work out easily with my, my large family load. It happened really quickly. I had a lot of beautiful opportunities. I ended up doing a couple hundred births in just 3 years. And, glorious experience. First time in my life making my own money, making good money.
Yeah.
It was one of those things where it was like, I said yes to myself and I lost all this weight and I had all these friends and I had this amazing job working with people that I loved. And, in 2019, well, that kind of led me out of the church. So about a year of midwifery was enough to get my eyes opened, in combination with the things that were going on with my boys, to say, what would it be like if I could just have my own spiritual authority and have direct connection?
Isn't it interesting? Like the direct connection is like the selling point of the church. Personal revelation is like their big selling point. And their thing is like, oh, focus on the scripture and the people, but it's focusing on the scripture and the people and actually getting your direct connection that usually kicks people out.
Right.
It's such an interesting thing.
Yeah. And it's, when you think of it that way, it's an interesting dance for them to hold to retain membership, because they have to also kind of always make you feel a little bit wrong or something. Yeah.
It's an interesting double think that they're trying to like create in the membership. It's like, yes, this is the way, people and scripture, but don't read too close and don't get too close or you'll find yourself out. Right.
Yeah. So that was
only love the people we tell you.
A really fast process as far as there were just a few little points where the key got turned and I received all of a sudden awareness about myself and my spirituality, and about 3 turns of that key. And it just like, I could feel it falling away, that connection to some kind of outside authority for my spirituality. And, once that happened, it was just impossible to go back. It was like learning that Santa's not real. You can't like believe yourself back into that.
Yeah.
And that was really exciting. I remember waking up every morning and feeling like I just wanted to jump on the bed because I felt so free, so excited about what was possible in my life. And probably the most immediate thing that I started to work on was my sexuality. And I think that's different than a lot of people. A lot of people, sexuality is kind of the last frontier. And for me, it was just like right then, like the moment I stopped wearing my garments, I was like, whoa, there's something here, that a whole part of my being that I didn't realize
you let
existed.
Satan out from behind the curtains. That's what you did. You took off your garments and Satan's like, aha!
He took me all
Got
the way.
you. All that was protective symbols were gone, and you were possessed of the devil.
Yeah.
That's it. That's it.
Yep, that's it. Story over.
That's so interesting. So that's sort of the deconstruction piece, but it's only one side of the story, right? And it's the side that gets focused on so much is really just deconstruction.
Yeah.
But after that, there's reconstruction.
Right.
Right? And like that to me is the way more inspirational piece. Like I'm so happy for you, and I'm so like weirdly proud of you for unlocking that. And in my mind, I keep picturing an image of unlocking and having just chains and pieces of armor that, you know, they talk about the righteous armor just like falling away from you, and you being a divine being in the middle of this pile of metal.
Yeah.
That's sort of the image that comes to mind when you talk about that, right? But then at some point, you reconstructed something around yourself.
Yeah.
Right? So I'd love to hear more about that. So the sexuality stuff came in first, but where did that take you? How did we end up with the Xoch we have today?
And I want to mention just the imagery you just presented, and what it did is flashed me back to almost wanting to show you guys a picture of myself then. Like, I'm not recognizable to my current self. And part of it is I lost a lot of weight, but there's more to it. Like, there's like a stuffiness, you know, that you can like feel in that I was trapped, you know, and to have that, you know, get free out of that was so beautiful. And I felt like that first year, I just allowed myself to be kind of in an agnostic space, and I was just open to everything. Like, I'm going to believe everything, and I'm not going to believe anything, and I'm going to play. And I fell in love with one of my coworkers who's a woman, and it was the most beautiful and tragic thing ever, that relationship dance, those first few years. And really, God, it really is. I could probably tell this story one relationship after another. That was how the universe, you know, kind of helped me put myself back together. There was a month at the birth center where we would have students come and rotate from around the country every month. And one month there was a lesbian sexual educator that runs like a sex toy shop in Milwaukee. And
makes all kinds.
At the same time, a pagan priestess. And we became really close, you know. Yeah. They literally would live at the birth center. And so it was a very close thing. And it was one of those things where I was just like, how did these people land in my life in the exact moment that I was like branching out into like, what is my sexual identity or orientation, and do I want one? And what is my spiritual orientation or identity, and do I want one? And learning to connect with the earth from this one, you know, woman, and then this other person, like helping me just explore the wide and wild world of, you know, the queer experience was fascinating.
Yeah, and we did a couple episodes on sexuality and spirituality, and I'm just curious, like, your brand of that, how does that connect for you? What is because your sexuality and your spirituality are pretty close together, right? Like that for you, correct me if I'm wrong, like those are really related energies and topics. So what do you think? I mean, did sexuality come first, or were you already on a spiritual thing and then you found that sexuality fit your spirituality? Or did you feel like that sexuality kind of landed first and then informed your spirituality? What was the dance like between those for you?
Well, I go back to that day that I stopped wearing garments, and there was it was just like feeling my shirt on my skin. Like, as I walked, I could feel my shirt touching my skin, and it was like delightful. And I realized there's this whole world of me that hasn't been explored. And so it's hard to say like what came first, because I had been on a really deep spiritual journey in the Mormon church. So it wasn't like I didn't have a spiritual life before that, but it was almost like I had to, this was the next step.
Yeah, that Reconstruction.
Yeah, but, you know, so in that sense, you could say spirituality came first, but as far as like my post-Mormon experience, it was the sexuality that actually kind of helped me recreate a spiritual life. And
it sounds like people and connections were instrumental in that movement. So it kind of feels like that's, especially if one of those relationships was, you know, a new unlocking of your sexuality.
Yeah.
That's a really hard thing to try and separate.
Right. Yeah.
One of the things that I feel in you is that you have a certain aliveness to you. And people comment that. They'll tell you, they'll like, who are you? What are you doing? Right? Like, we were dancing once, and this lady came up and was like, "Oh, that was great dancing." I'm like, "Thank you." Just no, she looks. She goes, "No, I meant her.
Yeah,
fine. She's special. You know,
yep, there you go,
as it should be." But like it was really. I think that aliveness is a sort of transmission. Like in your spirituality. You have the audacity or whatever to handle that with your body or be with yourself. And does that relate to maybe having children too? I'm curious about that.
Ooh, yeah. When you talk about that, I feel like my kids almost preserved that childlike aliveness for me, so that when I got free, I still had a connection to it.
Yeah.
And when, you know, once I broke out of the Mormon repression of basically any kind of embodiment is frowned upon in that culture, except for maybe having babies. It was just like, yeah, it feels audacious, but it also feels like I'm not going to waste one more minute not being alive and not being in my body and expressing that, you know, joy that I feel that really often is quite childlike, but it's also really sensual. And, you know, kids are pretty sensual. So,
yeah, they're definitely in their experiences.
Yeah, so it was kind of an opportunity would present itself, and of course I would see all of the potential dangers and fallout and people who were going to judge and disown and hate me, and it was just like, I have to say yes to my aliveness. And so I would lean in, and, you know, leaning into that first relationship was so terrifying, just terrifying. Like, I didn't say a word to anyone about it for 9 months of just being head over heels in love with this person. And it was the first time I allowed myself to be in love with anyone. You know, when you're married, you lock that shit down.
Oh yeah, hard.
But then on top of that, it was a woman. And so it was just like, wow.
So, I mean, you've talked a lot about how people have been so instrumental in this journey. Right. And you've mentioned that you're married, right? And you have a spouse. And I got to witness a really beautiful thing. And I wish to death that I was still able to be in contact with these people. But my ex-brother-in-law transitioned sort of right before and during the divorce. Right. And his husband was so incredibly supportive.
Yeah.
And I was just blown away that anyone could be that open and supportive as a spouse. Like, obviously I had no issue with his transition, but like, put myself in his shoes and being like, what would I do if I married a woman and suddenly found I was married to a man? And it was just like, whoa, like,
yeah,
you know. But I respect him so much, and like both of them. But that idea, like, you know, when I left my old life behind, it included leaving my partner behind, and it was instrumental for me.
Yeah.
But I'd love to talk a little bit about like your partner, your husband. I mean, that is such a roller coaster of a journey to be sitting in the sidecar of, like, or to be sitting passenger of. How has that relationship grown and developed, and like, what does that look like, or what did that look like as you were going through that journey?
Yeah, such a good question. And wow, what a ride. And, I feel honored to share a little bit about Dallin, my husband, because it's been so intense.
Yeah.
And, our first conversation about me possibly being, queer in some way, his initial response was, "Oh, you're just in a phase. All the people who leave the church do that,"
Mm-hmm.
Which was really just dishonoring and stupid. I was just like, oh, okay, whatever. But, he stayed with it, and we talked for hours and hours. And I feel like if up until that point we hadn't created such an open field of communication and goodwill and kindness, like, we weren't people who were ever at each other's throats. It was always about, like, how can we both show up as big as possible for each other in this family experience that we're creating. And so we had that foundation that was, like, so solid. And just the practicality of, we have 8 kids. There was something like, it's going to be better if we can make this work. However each of us grows through this, the more goodwill and kindness that we can move forward with, the better. And so we had long talks, and he eventually just said, "I don't like this. I think what you're doing is wrong." He was in the bishopric when I left the church, so
wow.
It was a lot for him. And he said, "I don't want to be the person that gets in the way of you following your heart." And so he held that tension for years.
Yeah.
And still, in a lot of ways, holds it, because here I'm this, like, Aries, like, I'm always growing into the next thing and leaning into, and at this point, like, I'm down for just about anything. I've broken through so much of the societal programming and fear, etc., that it's just like, if I'm feeling drawn to something, I'm going for it. And he's just, like, trying to, hold some kind of container for himself. And it hasn't been easy for him. In some cases, just about broken him. And he's shown up, and I've shown up for him as well in that. We've had phases where he literally couldn't stand me. And I totally understood why. And so I could hold the polarity of, here I am living and working with and sometimes sleeping with this person who I trigger at every move. And I get it, because I've been on the other side of it. And so both of us have just had a tremendous amount of grace in that. And I feel like right now, and throughout the process, I think at any moment I could have said we are closer and more intimate than we've ever been, because we're seeing more and more and more of each other in authenticity.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to transition at middle life, to transition in the middle of a big family. There's such a context. The context, like, there's the thing that everybody's processing in themselves, and then there's the context, and they process and they inform each other. So it's so interesting, and we're working with children who are finding their way, and it's a big deal to yank the carpet out of everybody's feet. Hey, kids, by the way, we're not going to church anymore. We're going to change, and then everything else changes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and even like, hey, kids, your whole life is planned out for you.
Yeah.
And then never mind, you can do whatever you want.
The plan's gone now.
Right? It is. It's a whole, like, it's a really big change for everybody. But especially because your transition, was, I would say, pretty, you say it, fiery, abrupt.
Yeah.
That context, is important, and I think one of the ways that happens in the meeting path is we try to compare ourselves. But you just can't. I mean, you're in the process you're in.
Yeah, nobody can tell me how to do this. Mm-hmm. And even if their context was similar, there's so much nuance to any family, any relationship. And yeah, like not an easy decision. Just deciding to take on a career just about broke me, because that I had to dissolve a whole structure that I had built around, being superior to other people because I was a stay-at-home mom. And that's pretty much been the game since then, is how am I thinking I'm better than other people and life giving me a really great opportunity to like wear those other moccasins and feel the other side of things and have to let it go and just be like, yeah, I was wrong. I was wrong about that. And then, doing some things poorly, some things too quickly, some things having impact on my kids that I didn't foresee, some things having impact on my kids that I did foresee, but I didn't see another way to move forward. And so I did it anyway. And being, staying with my kids in that process and being able to show up and say, yeah, I disappeared for a couple of years and that was abandonment for all of you. How do we grow back together after that? And just continuously letting myself be humbled, and the deconstruction never stops. Mm-hmm. So yeah, the kid thing is just, sometimes I look back and wonder how I did it. Like, how did I have the courage to do that much change that quickly? And it's funny because people will come to our house still, and our living room is like a relic of our former life. Like, we've got the George Washington praying over the fireplace, and like the Liberty Wall, and the family photos, and the pictures of Jesus. And there have been multiple times where I've I go in there and I'm just like, oh, well, and then this is so cringy.
With the tarot cards and the crystals, and that's also sitting there now.
Yeah, no, that's a new edition. And that's a after almost 7 years edition. And honestly, that was very conscious. It was my kids need this. Uh-huh. My husband needs this. Uh-huh. They need something to anchor us back to our old life so that we can build from there. And so, as ridiculous as it is, and I've been made fun of, and people have even come to my house that, were are post-Mormon or whatever, and been completely triggered because they know me in this whole other context, and they walk into my house and it's like Mormon homeschool family. We've even got like all sizes of violins hanging, it's just like this, like,
yeah. You guys were doing the Mormon homeschool family in a big way.
And it's just like, I don't want to deny that was an important part of my life. Mm-hmm. And what Dallin and I built is so precious. And the fact that we get to still live that, but with so much more freedom and grace and exploration, has just been magical for our kids. Mm-hmm. Almost every day I have an encounter with one of my kids where I think, 10 years ago, Sarah would not have been able to have this conversation. It would have been a completely different experience. And I love being in a household that there are no taboo subjects. There are no taboo words. There are, no taboo emotions. And because of that, my kids know they can come to me about anything. And the things that people are dealing with in our world right now, like, my kids dealt with that.
Yeah. One of the funny things, though, is that you freak your kids out a little bit. You know, usually your teenagers freak you out. Like, they're getting into edgy things, and they're like, you know... Yeah, we were watching Dan with Real Life the other night, and, you know, he finds his daughter's, you know, sexy underwear, and he's like, oh, you know. It's the opposite way, you know.
Yeah.
Kids happen.
They start to find your prayer things and tarot cards and all sorts of other stuff.
Or every once in a while, I don't dress up a lot, but every once in a while I'll be getting ready for some kind of like tantra thing or, you know, and I come out in my pink polka dot corset and my kids all get like, I watch them sort of disorganize and reorganize this.
They have to like reconstruct their image of you in their brain for a second.
But overall, they're pretty used to it. And, you know, my kids are all into the like, that's what she said jokes.
Oh, yeah.
But it's so funny because I just always tell them, if you land a that's what she said joke in this field, I'm going to comment whether I've said that or not.
Nice.
And they just cringe.
I do that to my kids too. Like even my stepkids, like my stepson, he's 12. Everything is what she said.
Yeah.
And at first my response was, you've never met her. That was my favorite response. Just being like, how would you know? Right? And
Yeah.
then, lately it's been more like, yeah, she did. Like, then he's even more messed up.
Yeah.
His mom,
It's so funny.
But he thinks it's hilarious, and his older sister thinks it's really funny, but the eldest one, it freaks her out, and she just... In the most hilarious way, it's like, oh gosh, gross, and like, you know, she does it because she knows I think it's hilarious too, but it's become a bit of a joke now.
Yeah, and it's one of the, you know, humor is one of the gateways to breaking patterns in a somewhat gentle and easeful way, and I really feel like that, you know, there is a bit of a push from me in that, but it's also... Every time I push into that and make my kids a little uncomfortable, I'm also giving them permission for their own sexual expression to be whatever it is. And so I'm glad that we have fun with it. My son the other day said something tasted like ass. and our eyes met, and he I could just see him going like, oh.
God, no.
I was like, have you tasted ass? And he's like, Mom. It's just a saying, you know.
Oh, gosh. Yep. Clap them cheeks is another one that my 12-year-old son likes to say.
What is it?
Clap them cheeks. Or he clapped my cheeks, and I'm like, he better not have. Oh, anyway. Okay, so I mean, like, to me, that whole idea of the communication and the like riding out those tough times, like I, from the other end of the spectrum, cannot imagine even having the desire to ride out the tough times with my ex-wife. Like, good God. Like, even the medium times were tough enough.
Right.
So to find that, I mean, and to have that support, even at its worst and most difficult, like, I've got to imagine that there's a lot of, like, permission to go further and knowing that you've got someone that was that safety for you. You know, I would hope, and I can imagine that gave you a bit more strength and a bit more courage to do the things. But that's what it comes down to for me, is there is so much strength and courage required, firstly, as a woman and as a mother, to leave the church. Like, I can't even imagine, right? My wife left the church because of the experience she's had with her girls and the bishopric, right? But I also know the pressure of, like, to be a good enough mom and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But then to explore sexuality and spirituality and knowledge and even perception of reality, to be willing to explore that to me demonstrates a level of courage I know that I don't currently possess, but I'm floored by. Yeah,
and when Steve says, I scare people, I think that's why.
Yeah, where does that come from? Where do you feel like, what is the source of your strength, I guess?
You know, I could say a few things. One is my ancestors. I feel that fucking pioneer spirit, you know? And then like...
That's good. Most people throw out the baby with the bathwater.
I don't throw that out. I claim it and push it forward. And there are definitely parts of that are toxic that I've had to work with and still struggle with. I had very, very powerful grandmothers that were almost entire polar opposites of each other. I have a really strong childhood foundation where I didn't experience a lot of childhood trauma. And that gave me a lot of confidence as a young person that I think created space for me to be courageous in middle age. And then, you know, I have a lot of fire in my astrology and I believe in that shit. Like there's something in me, like there's a will that if I know where my arrow's pointed, I have all the energy in the world to do it. And, you know, I think about going into midwifery after 20 years of sleepless nights with babies and how I would literally get thrilled sometimes when we would just finish a birth and another person would call. And it was just like, yeah, how many, you know, I did 5 births in 24 hours one day and it was just like, yeah. And, you know, now I think about that and it just makes me so tired. And I'm like, how did she do that? But it's, you know, all I can say is it's a gift and it's some kind of soul process where there's something in there that is refined, you know, whether through multiple lives or whatever it is that I have a tremendous amount of courage and a tremendous amount of integrity. And it's hard sometimes to be brave. It's not my favorite compliment, honestly, because sometimes I feel other people saying, oh, you're so courageous or you're so brave. And it's almost like they're like, thanks for taking one for the team. You know? and it reminds me of this body and this like small persona that all of this courage and energy is running through, and how, you know, there's a price to step into that level of risk. And when it involves your kids, like stepping into the unknown about your kids and knowing like they might hate me for the rest of their lives, or knowing that my husband might at any moment say, I just can't anymore. And having to leave midwifery, you know, was like, this is the perfect job. Like, what am I doing? And then also having an expression that is that intense and powerful. It's hard for people to want to stick around. And so a big part of my process, especially in the last couple of years, has been really like working with my abandonment wound. Because people will be drawn in, but they'll put me on a pedestal, or they'll just straight up be afraid of me because it's a lot.
I'm terrified of you. No,
and then, you know,
sometimes
I find myself having that sort of like mother projection or mother transference where they like look up to me and I'm all that, and and on my end a bond starts to grow, and then I get to experience them rejecting their parents over and over and over again. And you know, working with the pain of the number of people that I've fallen in love with, whether it was romantically or not, just like felt a bond with. And it's really painful.
Yeah.
Transference, countertransference is a bitch. And when you're in the healer's game and the meaning game, you get it's like the daily moldy bread. You get to. I'm gonna ask you. You kind of touched it, but what is the hard? I mean, what you just talked about, I think, is part of the hard. But you know, what do you think has been your like darkest? And you don't have to go to anything. You know, obviously, you answer with your will. But like, what is the thing to you that has just been surprising about your personal meaning path post religion, and how much that, you know, what surprised you about that, or, you know, color that in a bit. What's been the dark?
My commitment to staying open exposes me to a lot of pain, and I touched on that a little bit with the rejection thing, but it's also being open to and accepting things that most people assume are bad, even to the degree of allowing myself to be touched sometimes in really painful ways by certain aspects of life. And then sometimes getting out of my depth with that, and there's nobody to hold me. Like, very few people are playing it this big. And so I've found myself in those moments where I'm like, oh shit, I'm out of my depth and I'm alone. Like, there's nobody that's gonna be able to understand. And also, those are the most powerful and empowering moments for me to find what is there, what is holding me. In some cases, it's been, you know, the image of my kids' faces. And it's just like, I'm staying in as long as I can for them. And other times it's been, you know, life dropping these people in my lap, just, and I like feel like I can't go farther. So I think that, like, willingness to be open and willingness to be hurt, and not always knowing if there will be anyone to hold me in that hurt. And then the other part that's really hard is the living outside of so many assumptions that everybody else just holds as truth. Particularly trying to make my way as a sovereign woman in the world and try to provide for myself. And just feeling like everything's against me. And I think probably the darkest moment for me was realizing I had created this really fantastic circumstance for myself, renting my own apartment and having my business, and then realizing I couldn't quite do it. I'm like feeling the failure of that and being so frustrated at the amount of service and love and offering that I was putting into the world, and not having the money to pay my rent, you know? And really, like, sitting there with that. And it's funny because I think we maybe even talked about this. Steve and I tried to produce our first class. And we had every technical, you know, problem you can imagine. And it was one of those things where I was like, is this what I have to do to, like, make a living? Because what that project did was took me away from my essence and my offering and my health, and then it just, I got to a point where I was like, maybe my calling is to go walk out in front of a bus and show everybody how fucked up this world is.
Wow.
And that was one of those moments where I was like, okay, I'm going to ask for help.
Yeah.
You know, and thankfully I had people to get me through that. Yeah. When the highs are high and the lows are low when you're open to everything. And my capacity is growing every day, you know?
Yeah.
So
it was a great course, though. Go to soulandspiritwellness.com.
go find our course.
Narcissism course.
I almost died for
it's
it.
the worst produced course in the history.
But it's great content.
We'll redo it. It'll have the tech up the nines, and you'll love it, and it'll be a redemption arc.
Yes, you know, I'm a yes to that.
There really have been a lot of moments in our, you know, since we've been in this journey together or as separate waterfalls. And we're not twin flames, we're separate waterfalls. Corresponding and in essence resonant. But there have been those moments where it's just like, how do you fucking do this? You know, how do you give that thing that you're supposed to do what it is when it doesn't even feel like it's not, we're not singing to a market, you know,
right?
Like we're trying to do things that, you know, like the meeting business is a tough one anyway.
Well, right. And how do I sell what I just described?
Yeah, right.
And you know what? It's so fucking worth it to be free.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I even like before you talk about that, like, what are you selling? Like, we've talked so many times about the detriment of labels, right? Mm-hmm. And the idea of living in like one space and categorizing yourself in one way and how limiting that is. But like, as I listen to you, if I didn't know you as well as I do, right? And I actually, like, it's crazy to me to think that we've been doing this for a couple of years now. And so, like, genuinely, I actually feel like I know you. And like week one, I was like, who is this person? Like, you know?
Yeah.
But I wouldn't be able to like say what like any of your labels are. Like, listening to this episode right now, I'd be like, so hold on, are you like poly or bi or straight or like woman or other or like, you know what I mean? Like,
and my answer is yes.
Yeah, and I mean it's so interesting because usually what I find, right, and I deal with teenagers a lot, and so these labels are all they have and they stick to them so hard. But I see it in adults too. When the label changes, you can either sense authenticity in the new label, or you can sense that it's missing, or you can sense that like actually you don't even really believe what you're giving me right now, right? Like these are things that I don't know if
or
everyone
it's the
can.
old label just like shining up a little.
Yeah,
you know,
and I don't know if everyone can feel that, but I genuinely get a feeling of like you're looking for something, and this is the best you've landed on versus you've actually found this next phase of your life, whatever, right? Not in a judgmental way, but in a way of like, what am I experiencing and what's coming at me? It's so uncommon to experience someone giving the story, and also like for me especially to be like, yeah, I've got no fucking idea. Like there is no, like I couldn't put anything on you, and you know, it almost feels like like a penguin gliding through the water. Like nothing sticks to you. It's just like this. The whatever you've reconstructed around yourself repels labels.
Absolutely.
You know?
Yeah.
Sheds it. So I just am like, maybe it's a description that we need. How would you describe yourself to our average listener? If they were like, tell me what's the real
and full
you?
and alive.
There you go.
Yeah. Just an expression of life. And you know, what do I do? How do I work with people? I basically like give them what they want so they can see if that's what they really wanted or not. And sometimes that means I provide coaching from like a mothering place. Sometimes it's from a sex worker place. Sometimes it's, cleaning their house. And,
Our job descriptions are very flexible.
I have so many different weird ways that I make money right now. And also so many interesting ways I interact with people where I don't make money. But it really is, when you're with me, I'm all the way with you. And the universe is with you. And it's like a confrontation with self.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, the unbreakable mirror kind of, like, I will be here and you will see you.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah, it is. And it's
Scary.
funny because I feel like 2025 ramped it up even more. And, we were talking with Steve's ex the other day, and she was talking about, having the same dream over and over. And then it was like her soul shook the Etch-a-Sketch and she finally got a new dream. And I was like, oh my God, that's been me every week of 2025 is I'll just barely like start to feel like something's kind of like solidifying. I'm like, oh, maybe I'm going to do this. And it will just be like, and I'll literally wake up the next day and just be like, what was I doing? What am I doing? Is that still relevant? Is my like, daily morning practice spreadsheet even still relevant today, even though I made it 2 days ago?
Yeah. Wow.
I would describe you as priestess in the sense that you're holding a lot of feminine process, right? You have a strong masculine side as well, but like to me, it feels like you're here. And then reacting and being with what's there. And to me, that's like this is the conversation. This is why we're having a conversation, right? And trying not to be too didactically teaching. Yeah. It's a sense that, being with life, being a friend to life, and being informed by it. At the same time, you're trying to live it, like that. Really, that
listening,
listening, and on the medicine trip once, Xoch had a beautiful landing on just listening. And she went around to each person in this trip and just was listening, and it was magical. It was like the effect was magical. It was really an interesting thing to watch.
Yeah, and in that space, like I really was dropped into like archetypal energy, but it was like everybody's personalities were bothering each other. And I was just like, bring it. So I just started asking questions so that like that personality energy could like have a place to go so they could find what was under it.
So it does lead me to that, like we've done the archetypal conversation before, right? And we kind of talked about the ones that called to us, and I guess priestess, magician kind of gives like a really similar to me, different sides of the same coin. But I feel like one of the things I'd love for us to do in these episodes where we are the guests, and maybe I actually want to see if we incorporate this into all of our guest conversations, is asking the guest, like, what is your archetype? What's the one that you identify with? Be that in this second or in your life or whatever it is. But, Steve has thrown the priestess label archetype out. What's your response?
Yeah, and my work with archetypes has been interesting because I feel like I've had to burn down and destroy all of the idols that I built out of the archetypes, where I was trying to identify as good mom or whatever. And so in a lot of ways, I can now employ many archetypes based on what the moment is asking for. Probably the most common would be mother, and then priestess. There's a very curious, I don't even know what you would call this, like child thing that comes through sometimes. It's almost this like,
I think of it as the innocent.
This part that I created that can interpret nonverbal experience. So like even the experience of an infant or a toddler. But it's very wise. And so, yeah, those are a few that I work with. When I'm with clients, I kind of switch back and forth with the mother and priestess.
Yeah, I can see that.
Those are probably the main ones. The priestess one is interesting. It's making me think of the Thoth tarot deck. There's gorgeous art for this card. And it's, this woman, she's holding this web. And I feel that. Like, when I'm in a situation, I can feel how everything is affecting everything else, which sometimes is really frustrating because if somebody's not being conscious about their behavior, I'm just like sitting there feeling all of these little strings get pulled that they don't even realize like what they're toppling.
Yeah.
From this like one moment of, unconsciousness, and then learning how to like give that back to life. And I don't have to be responsible for all of that. That's when I get to like shed the archetype and say like, I'm also a person in this moment and I'm just going to take care of this body and this person.
Yeah. Wow. I feel like we started off really like heavy with Xoch. I feel like I kind of wish I had gone first.
You can go next, and then
No. I like the idea of me having 6 weeks to worry about this.
You also got to figure out how to be on the couch.
Oh, great.
Because
okay.
I'm on the camera.
I'll just turn the computer around.
I get to sit in the key seat. I get to sit in the key seat.
All right.
We'll have a conversation. That's so funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever actually experienced like, you meet people and they are sort of their own archetype sometimes. Mm-hmm. People are, and usually your mother is, your mother archetype and stuff like that. But I definitely resonate with the priestess one with you. Like, I feel like there have been so many times where it's almost supernatural that you'll bring up the topic for the conversation of the day and I'll be like, that's what I needed to talk about today. Yeah. So I love that feeling. It's great.
Yeah, it really is. That particular one is sacred. And it's not me. It's absolutely a channel. And when that comes through, when I'm working with people, I just feel honored to be the vessel, really.
Yeah.
So. Well, thanks, guys. That was beautiful and nourishing for me, and a little vulnerable. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, nourishing and challenging at the same time is a pretty good recipe for an experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, it feels good to be seen.
Beautiful.
You want to take us out?
Sure. Well, thank you for joining us for Conversations with Life. We have been talking about the path of Soji during this experience. We'll do the schmucks next and see how that goes. If you enjoyed this content, please share it with somebody who you think their path might benefit from the conversation, from seeing and feeling the work we do with this. And I hope you all have a fabulous wherever you are and whenever you are.